We intend to look at these risks alongside of other risks to evaluate them and prioritize them, and to take a look at what mechanisms we have to further mitigate the system from these types of threats.
Mr. Naumann. Thank you. My belief is that in general, the North American grid is well protected against cyber attacks, at least those threats that we know about. The biggest problem we believe we face is the lack of information because of the security nature of that information, and it's hard to devise mitigation against something you don't know. That's an something that's ongoing. We're trying to work with the federal agencies, but that to us is the #1 thing that we need to work on. As far as EMP attack, as Mr. Asante has said, and as Dr. Graham said, this is a low probability, high impact event. It is something that the industry will pay attention to, wants to work with the federal government to devise mitigation and responses. But what we need to know is, what is the design threat that needs to be dealt with? What are the mitigations from that we need to work out? What are the consequences of that mitigation? And what is the priority of this particular threat compared to the other low probability, high impact threats that have been mentioned? Thank you.
My time has expired. I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Lundgren.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'd like to congratulate the panel. They're not only on their verbal testimony, but their written testimony. It's very helpful. We could spend hours here, and we've got two really serious subjects, one the EMP and one cybersecurity, and I think it's good that we have them here together, but also there's a problem because we can't go in depth as to where we want to go on this. First of all, Mr. Naumann, you talked about the problem with the industry not knowing the threat because of the security nature of the information from the federal government. Are we beginning to attack that problem? How would you suggest that we try and resolve that problem?
I believe we need to have a more formal collaborative where a certain set of industry people are given sufficient clearance, and this is something that NERC is working on, where the federal government can give us high-level security information. Those experts can then, working with the federal government, devise the mitigation and then essentially censor the information but send out the mitigation to the industry so that we can implement that.
Mr. Asante?
We have been working hard. I think it is a critical impasse, and I think it gets back to the Aurora vulnerability. What's needed to devise the best mitigation strategies is accurate information in order to support the development of those strategies. We have been working very hard with the Department of Energy, with the Department of Homeland Security, and even through to the intelligence community to be able to share information, to be able to validate information as we see it in printed in public press of the Wall Street Journal, to be able to understand the success of tactics that adversaries have been able to use to compromise systems, whether they be government or private sector, and be able to appropriately adjust our defense postures. And importantly, going past information sharing, we're working on the elements to share the information so that within our industry we can get that information to the people who need to take action. And we're also working on developing the ability to respond to and to contain and to minimize the consequences of a successful attack. We're not going to put all our effort into simply prevention. That has failed us as a nation. Prevention is important, but it's not the only part of it, and we're dedicated to working with entities to be able to...
Let me ask you this. When we usually do a risk analysis, we talk about threat, vulnerability, and consequence. You obviously know the consequence. Your companies would know the consequence of a problem, disastrous or consequential interruption. Are you saying what you need more from the federal government is information with respect to the threat only, or also that the federal government has an ability to tell what your vulnerabilities are above and beyond what you know your vulnerabilities to be?
They're actually, it's on both accounts. As far as it relates to threats, when the federal government can observe and analyze successful attacks, it's important for us to understand how those attacks looked and how we would respond to those attacks. But importantly, as you address vulnerabilities, control systems are very complex. The implementations of that technology is complex, and the ability of any one asset owner or utility to understand the inner workings of that technology to all the underlying weaknesses that might be there it's very difficult for the asset owner to do that. Now,
So who would you look to for that?
we look
Government?
for both
Or-
the government, the Department of Energy and the Department of Homeland Security have two very successful programs that have been testing control system technology. Their discovery of vulnerabilities are very helpful for us to be able to enhance the security of those systems.
Does that need to be somehow made more robust? Is there a problem with getting secure security ratings for your people? I mean, where's the problem there?
Well, some of the problem has to do with the partnership that's required in this global supply chain of working with these vendors that supply the technology. A lot of times they're willing to look at the technology, but under contract agreements so that the information wouldn't be made public. That information then goes to the vendor to address. It's in many cases shared with utilities, but that progress has been limited by the scope of those programs. We do believe they provide a lot of value. We've been heavily participating.
Well, if you need any additional legislative umbrella for that, let us know. Dr. Graham, can you tell me, are there any other countries hardening their critical infrastructure to defend against EMP?
Yes, in fact, we've helped some of our allies in that direction, and we know that at least the Soviet Union, now Russia, has also worked on that. We know that China is extremely interested in EMP, has a large number of people there, engineers, scientists, working on it, and there's enough traffic among these communities that deal with high-tech and nuclear subjects outside the U.S. and among our adversaries that it's widely spread.
Just one real short question, and that is, are any countries ahead of us in terms of our efforts to either recognize our problem or to react to it by hardening our critical infrastructure?
They're all ahead of us in one way, which is they're less dependent upon computer-controlled information-dominant systems than we are, and therefore less vulnerable. In terms of number of people working on the subject, I think China is far ahead of us. And in terms of the implementation in civilian systems, most of the European countries are ahead of us.
Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes the young lady from California for 5 minutes, Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for this hearing. I think the fact that we are here today speaks of our bipartisan intention to pay attention to this. Our new chairwoman, Ms. Clark, is joined, of course, by the chairman of the full committee. Mr. Lundgren has had an interest in this for some time. I noticed Mr. Langevin, who chaired the subcommittee with jurisdiction over cyber, was earlier here, and a long time ago I was the ranking member on the cybersecurity subcommittee when it was chaired by Mr. Thornberry. So it's many years of frustration over this situation that has brought us here today, and I am happy to be an original co-sponsor of this bill. I think back to the last Congress at a hearing that we had, and we all knew because we had been briefed in a classified setting about some things that needed to be done to make the nation secure, and it was not happening. And when we turned to FERC, they were unable to make it happen, and we asked them if they wanted the authority to require the steps to keep the nation secure. They basically said they couldn't do it and they didn't want to do it, which I thought was a pretty weird answer in all honesty, because the comments made today about the need for collaboration, we agree with. And the comments made about the role of the ISACs, we agree with. And the need, and if there are suggestions, and that's my question, to add some additional steps so that the private sector has consultation, that would just enhance the matter. But when all is said and done, the infrastructure that is